Part 1. The Midnight Call. The clock struck midnight, and the town was wrapped in an eerie silence. The streets were deserted, and a dense fog settled over the asphalt, muffling any sound that dared to break the stillness. At 3 a.m., the world seemed to belong to another realm, a time when the veil between reality and the supernatural was at its thinnest. Sarah sat in her small, dimly lit apartment, the glow of her computer screen casting long shadows on the walls. She was a writer, accustomed to late nights, but tonight felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense of impending dread that she couldn't shake. The rain tapped insistently against the window, each droplet a tiny reminder of her isolation. As she typed, her phone buzzed on the desk, the screen lighting up with an unknown number. She hesitated before picking it up, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hello," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, there was silence on the other end, then a deep, raspy breath. "Sarah," a voice finally spoke, low and menacing. "You should have never ignored the signs." A chill ran down her spine. "Who is this? What do you want?" The line went dead. She stared at the phone, her hands trembling. Who could be calling her at this hour, and how did they know her name? Trying to dismiss the fear, she turned back to her computer, but the words on the screen seemed to blur and twist into menacing shapes. The room felt colder, and the shadows seemed to creep closer. She decided to make some tea, hoping the warmth would calm her nerves. As she moved to the kitchen, a faint scratching noise caught her attention. It seemed to be coming from the front door. She froze, listening intently. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. Her mind raced through possibilities, a stray cat, perhaps, or the wind. Gathering her courage, she approached the door and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the scratching continued. She reached for the doorknob, her heart hammering in her chest. Just as she was about to open it, the scratching stopped. The sudden silence was even more unnerving. Sarah took a step back, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She decided to call the police, but as she reached for her phone, the power went out. The apartment was plunged into darkness. Panic surged through her, and she fumbled for the flashlight she kept in a drawer. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but it also cast strange, shifting shadows. She pointed it towards the front door, half expecting to see some terrifying figure standing there, but it was still closed. She felt a brief moment of relief, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of unease. Sarah moved cautiously through the apartment, checking the windows and doors. Everything seemed secure, but the feeling of being watched persisted. She tried to rationalize her fear, telling herself it was just the storm and the late hour playing tricks on her mind. She decided to call a friend, someone to talk to, and help her feel less alone. But as she dialed the number, the phone screen flickered and went black. Frustration and fear mingled, and she threw the phone on the couch, her hands shaking. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the apartment. It came from the direction of her bedroom. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she gripped the flashlight tighter. Taking slow, deliberate steps, she made her way down the hallway, each creak of the floorboards amplifying her terror. When she reached the bedroom door, she found it ajar. She pushed it open with trembling hands, the flashlight beam revealing the familiar shapes of her furniture. But something was off. The closet door was open, and clothes were strewn across the floor. She stepped inside, the sense of dread intensifying. As she approached the closet, a cold draft sent shivers down her spine. She reached out to close the door when a hand shot out from the darkness within, grabbing her wrist with icy fingers. She screamed, pulling away with all her strength. The hand released her, and she stumbled back, tripping over a chair and falling to the floor. The flashlight rolled out of her hand, casting erratic beams of light across the room. Sarah scrambled to her feet and ran towards the living room. She needed to get out to find help. But as she reached the front door, She found it locked from the inside with a chain that wasn't there before. Panic surged through her as she fumbled with the lock, her hands slippery with sweat. Just as she managed to unchain the door, she felt a presence behind her. She turned slowly, the flashlight illuminating a figure standing in the hallway, its face obscured by shadows. It was tall, its form almost blending into the darkness. "Sarah?" The voice from the phone call echoed through the apartment. "You can't escape." She bolted through the door, racing down the hallway of her apartment building. Her footsteps echoed in the silence, each step filled with desperation. She glanced back, but the figure was gone. Or perhaps it was never there to begin with. She burst out into the street, the rain pouring down and drenching her instantly. The fog was thicker now, swirling around her like a living entity. She didn't know where to go, only that she had to get as far away as possible. As she ran, she heard footsteps behind her, matching her pace. She didn't dare look back, her fear driving her forward. The town was a maze of darkened streets and looming shadows, every corner a potential hiding place for whatever was chasing her. She turned a corner and found herself in a dead-end alley. Her heart sank as she realized there was no way out. She pressed her back against the wall, the cold bricks seeping through her clothes. The footsteps grew closer, and she could feel the presence drawing nearer. Suddenly, a pair of headlights pierced through the fog, a car approaching the alley. She waved frantically, shouting for help. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver, an older man with kind eyes, stepped out. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Sarah nodded, too breathless to speak. She glanced back down the alley, but there was no sign of her pursuer. She wasn't sure if she had imagined it all, but the terror felt all too real. "Come on, let's get you somewhere safe," the man said, guiding her to the car. As she climbed into the passenger seat, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched. The car pulled away, leaving the alley behind. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. But as they drove through the fog-shrouded streets, she couldn't help but wonder if she had truly escaped, or if the nightmare was just beginning. Part 2. The Haunting Echoes. The old man's car rattled along the deserted streets, the headlights barely cutting through the thick fog. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, shivering from the cold and the lingering fear. The man, whose name was Harold, drove in silence, occasionally glancing at her with concern. "Do you have someone you can call?" Harold asked, his voice gentle. Sarah shook her head. "My phone died, and I don't have family nearby." Harold nodded, his brow furrowing. "Well, my house isn't far. You can stay there until you feel safe." Grateful, but still uneasy, Sarah agreed. They drove through the winding roads until they reached a small, isolated cottage on the outskirts of town. The house was old but well kept, with a warm light glowing from the windows. Harold led her inside, the cozy interior a stark contrast to the nightmarish streets outside. "I'll make some tea," he said, heading to the kitchen. "You can sit in the living room and relax." Sarah sank into an armchair, the soft fabric comforting her frazzled nerves. She glanced around the room, noticing the vintage decor and shelves filled with books. A fireplace crackled in the corner, its warmth seeping into her bones. As she waited, her mind raced with questions. Who was the caller? What did they want from her? And who or what was the figure in her apartment? She couldn't make sense of it all, but the terror was still fresh in her mind. Harold returned with 2 steaming cups of tea and handed one to her. "Drink up, it'll help," he said, sitting across from her. "So, what happened tonight?" Sarah took a sip, the warmth soothing her throat. She recounted the events, from the strange phone call to the terrifying encounter in her apartment. Harold listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When she finished, he sighed. "This town has its share of strange happenings. I've heard stories, but I've never experienced anything like this. Stories? Sarah asked, leaning forward. What kind of stories? Harold set his cup down, his gaze distant. Ghosts, apparitions, things that go bump in the night. Some say this area is cursed, that it sits on ancient, haunted land. But most people dismiss it as folklore. Sarah's heart sank. She had always been skeptical of such things, but tonight's events had shaken her beliefs. Do you think it's real? The curse, I mean. Harold shrugged. I don't know. But I do know that fear can make us see things, hear things that aren't there. It's possible that your mind is playing tricks on you. Sarah wanted to believe him, but the fear was too real, too tangible. I just want to know why this is happening to me, she said, her voice trembling. Harold patted her hand reassuringly. We'll figure it out. For now, try to get some rest. You can sleep in the guest room. Sarah nodded, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She followed Harold to a small, cozy room with a neatly made bed. Thank you, she said, grateful for his kindness. You're welcome, Harold replied. Good night, Sarah. As she lay in bed, the events of the night replayed in her mind. She tried to push the fear away, telling herself that she was safe now. But as she drifted off to sleep, a faint whisper echoed in her ears. You can't escape. Part 3. The shadows deepen. Sarah woke with a start, the whisper still lingering in her mind. The room was bathed in the soft light of dawn, the terror of the night before seeming like a distant nightmare. She sat up, trying to shake off the lingering unease. Harold was already up, brewing coffee in the kitchen. Good morning, he greeted her with a warm smile. Did you sleep well? Better than I expected, Sarah replied, though the truth was she had tossed and turned all night. As they sipped their coffee, Harold suggested they visit the town library. If there's any truth to the stories, we might find something there, he said. Sarah agreed, hoping for answers. They drove into town, the fog lifting to reveal a sleepy, quaint village. The library was an old, stone building with tall, arched windows and a sense of history. Inside, they were greeted by Mrs. Wren, the elderly librarian. Harold explained their quest, and Mrs. Wren's eyes lit up with interest. Ah, the old legends, she said, leading them to a back room filled with dusty tomes and ancient manuscripts. There's plenty to sift through. Let me know if you need any help. Sarah and Harold spent hours combing through the records. They found stories of hauntings, mysterious disappearances, and strange occurrences dating back centuries. One tale in particular caught Sarah's eye, the legend of the Midnight Caller. According to the legend, a vengeful spirit roamed the town at night, calling out to its victims and marking them for torment. Those who heard the call were said to be cursed, doomed to be haunted until they could unravel the spirit's mystery and lay it to rest. Sarah's blood ran cold as she read. Could this be what was happening to her? Harold, look at this, she said, showing him the passage. Harold frowned, reading the text. It fits with what you experienced. But how do we stop it? Mrs. Wren approached, her eyes sharp despite her age. The Midnight Caller is said to be the spirit of a wronged woman, seeking justice. You must find out what she wants and help her find peace. Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. How do we do that? Mrs. Wren handed her an old, leather-bound journal. This belonged to Margaret Halloway, a woman who lived in your apartment building in the 1800s. She vanished under mysterious circumstances. Perhaps her story holds the key. Thanking Mrs. Wren, they took the journal and left the library. Back at Harold's house, they pored over the pages. Margaret's journal detailed her life, her hopes and dreams, and a dark secret she had been accused of witchcraft and ostracized by the townsfolk. In her final entry, she wrote of a terrible sense of betrayal and vowed to seek revenge on those who wronged her. Sarah's heart ached for Margaret, She was innocent, she said, tears in her eyes. We have to clear her name. Harold nodded. But how? Most of the people involved are long gone. Sarah thought for a moment. There might be records, old court documents or letters. We need to prove her innocence and tell her story. They spent the next few days digging through archives, talking to local historians, and piecing together Margaret's story. Slowly, a picture emerged. She had been falsely accused by a jealous rival and condemned without trial. The town had covered it up, but the truth was there, hidden in dusty records and forgotten letters. Armed with their findings, Sarah and Harold visited the town council, presenting their case. The council members were skeptical at first, but as they laid out the evidence, they began to see the truth. A formal apology was issued, and a plaque was erected in Margaret's honor, clearing her name. That night, Sarah returned to her apartment, feeling a strange sense of calm. As she stood in the living room, she felt a presence beside her. Turning, she saw a faint, ghostly figure, a woman with sad, kind eyes. "Thank you," the figure whispered, her voice like a soft breeze. "I can rest now." With that, the figure faded, and the apartment was filled with a warm, peaceful light. Sarah knew the nightmare was over. Margaret's spirit had found peace, and the curse was lifted. Part 4. The Dawn of Peace. The days following Margaret's vindication were filled with a newfound tranquility. The oppressive fog that had seemed to haunt the town lifted, replaced by clear skies and a sense of renewed energy. Sarah felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The terror of that night was becoming a distant memory, though the lessons it taught her remained vivid. Sarah and Harold had become close friends through their ordeal, and she often visited his cozy cottage. They would sit by the fireplace, sipping tea, and reflecting on their strange adventure. The bond they formed in those moments of fear and discovery was unbreakable. One evening, as they were reminiscing about the events, Harold suggested, "You should write about this, Sarah. Share Margaret's story with the world. It's a tale that deserves to be told." Sarah nodded, the idea resonating with her. "You're right. Margaret deserves to be remembered. And maybe it will help others who face their own fears and doubts." She spent the next few weeks writing feverishly, pouring her heart into the story. The process was cathartic, helping her process the trauma and understand the deeper meaning behind the haunting. She titled the book The Midnight Caller, dedicating it to Margaret Halloway and all the forgotten souls seeking justice. The book was a success, resonating with readers who appreciated its blend of historical mystery and supernatural intrigue. Sarah received letters from people all over, sharing their own experiences with the unknown and thanking her for bringing light to Margaret's story. One letter stood out to her. It was from a woman named Emma, who lived in a nearby town. She wrote about her own experiences with a haunting and how reading The Midnight Caller gave her the courage to confront her fears and seek answers. Emma expressed a deep gratitude for Sarah's work, and the two began corresponding regularly. Through her writing, Sarah found a new purpose. She continued to explore stories of the supernatural, always with a focus on uncovering the truth and giving a voice to the silenced. Her reputation as a writer of haunted histories grew, and she traveled to different towns, investigating local legends and bringing closure to restless spirits. Despite her success, Sarah never forgot the terror of that night. It served as a constant reminder of the thin line between the known and the unknown, and the importance of facing one's fears head-on. She remained close to Harold, often seeking his wisdom and insight as she navigated her new path. One crisp autumn evening, as Sarah and Harold sat by the fireplace, he handed her an old, worn envelope. "I found this among my grandmother's things," he said. "It's a letter addressed to you." Sarah took the envelope, puzzled. Inside was a faded letter written in elegant script. It was from Margaret Halloway. "Dear Sarah," it began, "if you are reading this, It means you have helped me find peace. I cannot thank you enough for your courage and kindness. Please know that I will always be watching over you, guiding you as you uncover the truths hidden in the shadows. With gratitude, Margaret. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she read the letter. Margaret's words were a testament to the enduring power of compassion and the importance of seeking justice. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her journal, a cherished reminder of the bond they shared. As the fire crackled and the night grew darker, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, her spirit intertwined with those she had helped. The terror of being alone at 3 a.m. had transformed into a journey of discovery and connection, one that would continue to guide her through the mysteries of the night. And so, as the clock struck midnight, Sarah knew that she was never truly alone. The spirits of the past were with her, their stories etched in the fabric of time, guiding her as she illuminated the darkest corners of the human soul.